Let me start by thanking everyone for joining today's webinar. We've got an all-star group of product leaders to speak with us today on the subject of managing without authority. For those of us, who've been drawn into the product discipline, whether you're in product management or product marketing or product growth, no matter the job level that you're at, you find yourself in a position needing to get things done with people you have no organizational responsibility to, or vice versa. So as a result, I found that this topic continues to be one of the top challenges facing product people to this day. I'm Travis Kaufman, VP of Product Growth here at Trinsic, and I'll be your host today. Let me start by introducing you to our esteemed panelists. So you've got the pictures of them in front of you. I'll go ahead and introduce from left to right. We have, first here we have Cheryl Chavez, who is the former Group Vice President of Product and UX at Marketo. Cheryl's got over 19 years of experience leading award-winning products at both enterprise companies and startups. She was previously with Marketo since 2009 and was originally brought on as the first product manager within the organization. She was responsible towards the end of her time there for all of product management, user experience, and documentation teams at Marketo. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, everybody.
Next up, we've got Mike Belcito. Mike is the co-founder of Product Collective, and he's also the co-organizer of Industry, which is the product conference. It's one of the top-rated product management summits in the US. Well, actually anywhere. They have multiple locations across the globe. So Mike was also named one of the top 40 influencers in the field of product management. He also serves as an adjunct faculty member of Case Western Reserve University in the Department of Design and Innovation. And he's also the co-host of Rocket Ship FM, a top-ranked product podcast. Mike, you there?
I am, yeah. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
You bet. All right, so moving next, we have Ciara Peter. She's the Senior Director of Product Management at Box. And Ciara leads end-user products for Box, managing all of the Box apps across the web, mobile, and desktop platforms. Prior to her time at Box, she led products at BetterWorks and held a number of design leadership roles at Salesforce. She specializes in using data and consumer engagement patterns to increase usage in products in enterprise space. So thank you again for joining, Ciara. Can you hear us okay?
Thanks. Yep.
Great. All right. And last but not least, we have Kirsten Butzo. She's a product coach at Pragmatic Marketing. Kirsten has more than 20 years of product management and marketing experience working in the education, tech, and telecommunication industries. Prior to joining Pragmatic, she held VP of Product Management and Marketing positions with Global 500 companies, including Fujitsu, Pearson, and Blackboard Marketing. Now, before we move into the Q&A portion, let me cover a few little housekeeping items. Just to make sure to let you guys ever know that we are recording this webinar. We will send it out to you afterwards, so don't feel the need to copy down notes or anything out. We'll send this out to you. And we have a set of questions that we're going to be asking the panel today. And at the end, we'll save time for you to ask questions of them. So I'll make sure that we carve time out. So when you're throughout the webinar, feel free to post out on Twitter using the hashtag product experience. I'll be monitoring that. And you can also post directly in the webinar any questions that you have. And I'll go ahead and go through those towards the end of the session. So with that, let's go ahead and begin. The first question for the panel is related to managing cross-functional stakeholders. So let me start with Cheryl here. So are there different approaches that you take with different stakeholders throughout the org, different departments or?
Well, yes and no. And I think it partially because the motive behind the request might be slightly different. But if you boil it down, essentially as a product manager, our jobs are to listen and to empathize with our stakeholders, whether those are customers or internal stakeholders. So first and foremost, it's really important that a product manager approaches that conversation with empathy and the ability to listen to what that stakeholder is trying to communicate to them. And it's also really important that the product manager doesn't immediately reject the idea. And so, because you're also trying to build trust across the organization. And when you immediately reject the idea, the stakeholder then doesn't feel like they're being listened or that their opinion actually matters.
Yeah,
and
you're
so
dismissing the idea.
you're just completely dismissing them, right? And so if you're going, and there's, every product manager runs into this problem where everybody wants something, right? And they've got roadmaps and priorities. But as a product manager, we also need to be able to defend our positions. And I really like to use data to help defend. We used to always say that, opinions lose battles, but data is defensible. And so if you can bring data to the table to help support your reasoning as to why, maybe it's because there's a conflict of resources, or there's priorities that are, that doesn't match the company objectives, or what have you. You want to be able to clearly communicate that back to your stakeholders. So that really applies across the board. But then, you may use other soft tactics with different people depending on personalities and stuff like that. So,
good. Kirsten, does this resonate with you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually completely agree with what Cheryl's saying. And I think another kind of important nuance to keep in mind is this. I think very often as product leaders, we find ourselves in the role of communicating our vision and our direction out through the organization to ensure that we have everybody always moving in the right direction. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I think sometimes what that means is we have this sensation that everybody has to know everything all the time.
Right.
And that's actually not true. I think one of the things that we can do to help manage how we communicate across different stakeholders and how to manage different stakeholders is to throttle who knows what when. I don't have to tell everybody in the organization everything that I'm up to all the time as a product leader. Mm-hmm. In other words, when I'm working with my engineers or my developers, I don't necessarily have to share with the sales team or our outbound marketing communications team products that have been conceived, but we haven't even started to build yet. We haven't even scoped them. We don't even have specifications yet. Maybe that's a dialogue that only happens between the product team and the engineering team or the development team. Maybe as we get closer to building things, we start bringing other parts of the organization in, because now we have a little bit more certitude as to the actual direction we're heading and what's likely to get delivered when we need other parts of the organization like support, maybe sales operations to start looking at product. There's going to come a point in time where we've got product that's ready to be demoed. We want to bring our communications team so they can start getting prepared for product launches. So I find that one of the things that can be really effective is if you define all the different stages that you've got when you're building your product, and you think about which parts of the organization need which pieces of information when, so that they can all get ready for a launch, that when we put a product into the marketplace, it's a comprehensive solution that has all of the pieces in alignment to deliver to the market, but everybody gets the right information at the right time for that preparedness. If we feed information out from before it's ready or before it's conceived to parts of the organization, very often what we find is we end up having to engage in a lot of recommunication. And so one of the best ways that I think we can create that alignment and manage those stakeholders is by creating some sort of communications matrix or strategy where we articulate who's going to get to know what when based on where we are in the product development life cycle.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great. And Mike, so, are there some universal truths that you found either work with communicating? I mean, Kirsten mentioned launch. It's like a perfect event where there's necessary communications at different levels. And have you found something, or do you think there's universal truths that work for someone in by different departments potentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one universal truth that should be the case is that everybody is focused on what that corporate overall vision is, what that corporate strategy is. And by the way, like you can use that to make sure that, that's the common ground that you're working on with everybody. The only thing I might add to everything else that's been mentioned is just, it's important. Like, and this is, I suppose, universal truth, right? Every department has their own motivations. Every department has their own, fires to put out. They have things that are important to them. Yes, we're all working towards that corporate mission, but sales is worried about selling. Engineering is juggling all sorts of other requests. They might want to know, okay, you're asking me to do something. Why? Why is this more important than the 12 other requests that I've received that I have on my plate today? So I think it's important to keep in mind that, all of these different groups do have their different motivations, and just trying to put yourself in their shoes to understand what those motivations are and And really letting them know that you care about those motivations. I know Cheryl mentioned empathy before. I think that's so important. Going back to the universal truth, it's just we all have our different priorities with the overarching, corporate agenda that of course we're all in the same boat and want to see succeed. But it's important that we can all understand what those motivations are, and they're going to be different with every single group that we're working with in the company.
Got it. Yeah. And so, Ciara, how does this play out for you at Box? I mean, is this resonating with you? Is this how kind of the your approach when you have a lot of different cross-functional stakeholders, how to manage their expectations?
Yeah, definitely. I think I take kind of like two lenses to this particular question. So one is, a lot of the managing expectation has to do with product prioritization, and then additionally, there are kind of like specific tactics for each organization. So I think I kind of lean towards there not being different approaches. In fact, one of the things that's been most successful for me is having everybody in the same room, and I like to do my prioritization on a cadence. So it depends on what your release cadence is and all these kind of things. But I've kind of gravitated towards like quarterly planning cadence, because that's the sort of time frame where things can change a little bit, but people can still stay up to date. And one of the things that's been really effective for us at Box is we have, before this kind of quarterly planning, what we call an interlock meeting, where we get all the product leads together, and then also each of a delegate from each kind of go-to-market department or cross-functional department. So this is CS, sales, legal, marketing. Yeah. And we ask every team to give us their top 10 priorities. And the reason for this, we're always collecting priorities from a number of different channels. But the reason I like getting everyone in the same room is so that our stakeholders can understand, there are other priorities from other departments. So on the one hand, you're kind of letting everyone know these are the things that, your request might be competing with, but also to see, these are where everyone is kind of saying the same thing, and we really need to, maybe reevaluate our company strategy. On the kind of, one thing that I would say maybe differs a little bit is like how you sort of maintain credibility within these organizations. So while it's great to get everyone in the same room and kind of have a delegate, I think product person at any level does need to get in the shoes of their stakeholder or of their customer. And so with engineering, it's building those proposals together. It's making sure that like we call our product engineering and design organizations the build organizations, and we don't have kind of product strategy meetings at a company level and then engineering strategy. We do those all together. And so I think that's kind of a cultural thing that's really important. For CS, I set goals, and I've had my team set goals of, how many customer feedback meetings are we going to do per quarter? So that can be customer feedback, user research. But I think if in order to gain credibility, you kind of have to get into the shoes. And with sales, it's, setting a certain amount of, sales meetings you might participate in or shadow. So those are kind of some approaches that I've taken.
Well, I like that you call out kind of bringing people together as part of this process, is because it also lets you identify, I think, areas where there could be misalignment. So you can actually manage expectations that way. That's a great call out.
Can I add just one more thing too?
Please.
So at Marketo, we actually had a process called Product Council, which is similar to what Ciara just described at Box, where we brought in many of the stakeholders at more of the executive level. But one of the things that we recognized too was that a lot of people, we used to always laugh about, it was the sales feature, the soup du jour, whatever was top of mind, whatever they needed to close a deal. But one challenge we faced was that so many people across the organization would bring feature requests to us. Yeah. And we up-leveled that. And it was actually a process to do this. We up-leveled it to having people bring business problems for us to solve, not feature requests. And so as we sort of worked through that process, I think we got to a much better understanding across the stakeholders as to what we were trying to solve as a company and why things were different priorities. It's not about the blue button, but it's about, the problem that actually the blue button will solve. And maybe it's not a blue button, maybe it's a red button. I'm being silly now, but I think you got my point.
That's great. No, that's great. I mean, so then let me move on to the next question. It's somewhat related, and it's different because it's a very specific stakeholder. So managing up, very specifically, you have someone who you're reporting into, whether that be the VP or the CEO of your organization. They bring a new product idea to you. So I'm curious, how do you manage that conversation? So let's start with you, Mike, on this one, just to get your perspective on how do you manage that conversation?
Sure. And I've been in this boat before, many times. So I will say, I never like saying, oh, that's a bad idea right away, right? Like that's not, even if I really felt that way, which it'd be really hard for me to any new idea, it's kind of hard to judge right on the spot, unless you have all sorts of data anyway, right? And I guess to that end, data usually does help in having conversations, especially at the executive level, at least that I've found. Sometimes the best ideas could come from anywhere. Maybe that's folks that are interacting with customers on an everyday basis, but it could absolutely be coming from the CEO as well, right? So I absolutely love encouraging vetting out an idea further. While I don't like saying it's a bad idea right away, I also don't commit to moving forward with it or anything like that right away too. I will say that anytime that I'm having these types of conversations, though, I do like reminding everybody in the room, if there's multiple people there, if it's just a one-on-one with the CEO or VP or whatever it might be, that we did have a roadmap, in place, and that roadmap exists because we all thought that it was really important for the company to, act on that roadmap. So new ideas can come at a cost. I mean, and it's not to say that roadmap couldn't or shouldn't change. Actually, it should be a fluid process. We should always be revisiting that. But it absolutely means if we are to take on any sort of new idea later on, something's got to give. There is going to be a cost. And at least even in that initial conversation, reminding that is the case, sometimes that alone can be enough to say, all right, well, you know what, at least like for the future, let's start to look at this. But I never like committing or saying it's a bad idea right off the bat, especially when it's coming from the CEO. I do think it's worth at least having that conversation.
Yeah. So you're not, trying to, reduce the validity of the idea, but you're also in trying to manage expectations. You're not committing immediately. So I think it's an interesting balance. Ciara, how about you on this one?
Yeah, I had an aha moment once when a CEO, we're in some product review meeting and the CEO had an idea, maybe we should change X. And then a couple weeks later, we made that change, and then something else that we had already committed to got pushed out. And and then the CEO said, "Wait, why did we do that? Why did we prioritize that one thing over the other?" What I realized from that is, CEOs or like execs, when they have product ideas, I mean, the reason that often they're in these positions is because, they have a really strong intuition and they have great ideas, but they don't necessarily realize how powerful they are. And so what I actually, I like to do is really clarify, like, what do you want me to do with this idea? So, sometimes you'll kind of know, but I really like asking, okay, great. Is this something you want us to kind of maybe keep on the back burner for later? Or, is this more like something that you want us to evaluate, shifting things on the roadmap? And a lot of the time I'll find that person says, oh, no, I just, wanted to get that out there. A lot of what CEOs do, they don't have time to keep task lists to make sure that, I'm like properly emailing this person at the right time or following up on my idea. So a lot of the time they kind of do have to behave in a fire hose manner. And so they want to make sure it's out there, it's off their plates. And so, that's something that's worked really well for me. And then, if they say, no, this is really important, we got to do it now, then we'll go back and do a formal review and just kind of having, and then we'll look at the trade-offs and kind of do like a more formal scoping where we present the data. But I've found like data, typically works when it comes to these trade-off conversations.
I think that's great. I mean, you call out, you actually pose the question back to them. So what are your expectations of this conversation? So that way you're aligned while you're having it.
Yeah.
Great. And Kirsten, how about you? So managing up.
So I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to agree with something everybody said. So the first thing, what Mike Balsito said, have the conversation carefully. I'm definitely going to advocate that.
Yeah.
Secondly, I love what Sierra said, and it actually dovetails really nicely to a comment from Niles Davis in the chat box. And so I happen to know Niles, and that jumped out at me. And he said, the question is, how does this thing that you're asking for align with the strategy we're currently tracking to, which is exactly what Sierra said. And I love the way that she talked about phrasing that with, help me understand why you're asking.
Yeah.
At Pragmatic Marketing, one of the things that we like to say is, we have a phrase that we like to use, and we like to say, everybody in the company should be a pragmatic marketer. In other words, everyone in the company should, and we want them to provide market data and sources of information that they've gathered and gleaned from what it is our customers want us to do for them. However, it's going to be our role and our job to take all those individual data requests and all those individual data points and juxtapose them against our strategy. So when we set out to build things, it's in the fulfillment of that strategic vision versus just individual requests at a time, which have the potential to create a product that Cheryl talked about. I don't want to think about features. I want to think about how we solve problems. I don't want to create a product based on a lot of individual feature requests. I want to build a product based on solving problems in the marketplace. And so I think all the things that everybody has said is exactly what we would advocate leveraging as well. I would add two kind of little data points that we like to use to help throttle those conversations. And that is if you can tie these requests to some form of market evidence, in other words, some sort of quantifiable proof as to the occurrence of that thing in the marketplace, that it justifies putting resources towards it. And then also understanding what impact happens if we don't do this thing. In other words, are we having some sort of negative impact on our clients' profitability, or are we negatively impacting the number of calls we drive into support or something like that? So if I can use those two additional pieces of data to help throttle this conversation, it all really comes together nicely in fulfillment of that strategic vision.
That makes sense. I mean, handling the conversation delicately, understanding what it is that you may impact if you do it or don't do it, and just having that information as part of the conversation, I think is excellent. Cheryl, how about you, managing up?
Yeah, so I have a couple things to add. So first of all, I agree with what everybody has said here, but for me personally, I was fortunate to experience what I call like two different types of CEOs at the same company. The first being a co-founder CEO who's a total product guy. And then the second being a CEO who's more of a sales guy. And, the conversations actually went quite differently depending on which one I was speaking to. Now, one was an earlier, it was Marketo, early stage. We were still growing like crazy and everything, but having a conversation with a product-driven CEO really is more of a detailed conversation about what we're ultimately trying to achieve, rather than, it was less likely that he would throw over a feature request and then I'd be like, oh no, what do I do with this, right? And so those kinds of conversations are much more strategic. At least that's how they sort of landed. Versus, you get a newer CEO who's more of a sales-minded person, and there's like fun ideas that are falling from the sky, and you're sort of like, okay, how do I manage this? And then I would use the tactics that have been described around asking why are you asking for this? What benefit do you think that this sees? How does it align with our company goals? And then they kind of step back and are like, okay, I kind of see how she's thinking about this versus how I'm thinking. It's not just a shiny bauble that I want to go build, but really what sort of value does it provide to the customer? But then, and I like to always use some research and data to help support that decision. Again, going back to the not immediately saying no, but really being able to have reasons for why we're either saying, I think that's a fantastic idea and this is how it fits into the bigger picture, or, a maybe later.
Yeah, that's great. And so what's interesting is that we'll move on to the next question. And it's again, these are very closely related. We commented earlier in the previous question, managing the must-have requests from the field. So you've got your sales team coming to you with ideas around your product. You've got, support, success. You have a lot of customer-facing teams that have valid ideas to bring to the table. How do you manage their expectations when that is brought to you that way? So, Ciara, if you don't mind taking that one first, we can start with you.
Yeah, definitely. So, obviously we would start with company KPIs, but there still be maybe many competing must-haves that do align to a KPI. So I think the next kind of level down from there is having frameworks underneath that. And so like one framework that I've seen used is, for example, at Box, like my goal is to increase weekly active usage. And there are many ways you can do that. So you can do these kind of features for expanding the funnel, for virality, but there's no point in there's no point in trying to expand the funnel if, let's say, something lower down on that framework, like is broken, like people can't log in, or there's a security issue. And so for things that already exist, if the very basic kind of functionality isn't there, or people can't administer the product, then the product is really not complete and not usable. Of course, there are a lot of kind of deeper and product specific evaluations that you'd have to do at the product level. But that's another thing I like to think about, because you can say, you can talk about a KPI all you want, expanding ARR, but if something that you have is broken and you're not going to retain people, then that's a bigger issue, and you can really quantify that too. Tactically, there's a game that probably not a game, a strategy that I've used that probably many of you have heard of, called 100 pennies, where basically, let's say that there's a certain amount of kind of requests, problems to solve coming from the field. And then there's kind of a currency that you can give to those stakeholders. And then really there's only a certain amount of capacity. And then, that kind of forces others to get in a little bit of the product mindset and make those trade-offs. And then they're the ones actually making the decision. Let's say that there's, let's say that the requests are worth 100 points, but there's, only 50 points of currency. Then at that point, the discussion really goes back to the rest of the team. And that usually works pretty well in kind of seeing things from, that product point of view.
Very nice. Very nice. So Mike, how about you? So on the must-have, quote unquote, requests from the field.
Yeah, well, oftentimes I've found that these must-have requests, they're related to deals that maybe the field, especially in sales, if the sales team lost out on, right? Yeah. And so a customer might say something like, well, yeah, we're going another route because you don't have, feature X, or if you only had feature Y, then we'd move forward, but you don't. So, right. And that is obviously it's frustrating for the sales team, because in their mind, right, they're taking that customer, at face value, like, hey, we would have had this sale. My job is to sell. This product needs feature Y. But we as product people know that isn't necessarily the case all the time, right? A customer could just be saying that they needed feature X because it's kind of easier to say, I don't want your product that way, right? It doesn't cost them anything to say, well, hey, you don't have that feature, so we're not going to go with you. Now, knowing that, what I love to do is, and hopefully, as product people, we could do this and plan for this without waiting for these situations to happen. But, plan to go with the field sales team to visit customers on sales calls. And you could use it as a strategy, for them to say, hey, look, I'll be your, secret weapon from the product team. And it's not all the time that, folks leading product are coming to visit this customer. So, I want to hear the same sort of things that you're hearing. Put yourself in their shoes and try to empathize with them that way. But as you're going through these multiple visits, after each visit, have a conversation with the field rep to make sure that you're understanding sort of the same thing that you're hearing what they're hearing, right? Or if you're hearing two different things, you can actually have that conversation about that. Even if you're not going to end up, implementing those must-have feature requests, I think it helps show folks on that side that you are listening and that you are trying to hear directly from the customer what is important. So it's one of these things where, and by the way, you might learn things that you didn't necessarily know, right? You might, of course, you're meeting with customers all the time, but in this new sort of setting, you might be able to learn things, and you might be able to, maybe that must-have feature request is actually something you should be implementing. But I think going through and actually, going side by side with the field team, it's just one sort of tactic or one sort of strategy that can help.
No, that's excellent. That's excellent. So Cheryl, how about you? So must-haves from the field. I mean, are there
Yeah.
rules that you put in place? Like, do you say, come back to me when you've got 3 customers asking for the same thing, or some baseline of qualification?
Great question. And, I'll add a little to what Mike just said too. We tried to look at, revenue at stake as one of the metrics to see, how important is this particular feature for a customer. Now, we weren't in the business of building custom features, right. But in particular in the enterprise, you get a lot of customers who they need this and they need that. So we would try to tie it back to opportunity cost if we weren't to, and how much revenue we would lose. And we would also track the number of times we would get this request, because in a large sales organization, there's maybe 100 reps, not 5 or 10. And so a way to track that becomes really important. So we actually implemented something in our CRM tool that allowed us to track this, working very closely with the SC team. So they're the more technical folks who are responsible for doing all like the product demonstrations as part of the sales cycle. And so, that became really important. And Mike made the point that sometimes you end up building those features because you're recognizing that there is something missing in your product that this particular type of customer needs. And that allowed us to collect enough data to go make that justification then. But when you're in the case of saying no, I tend to go back to this idea around being able to help people understand the trade-offs, right? So if Mr. Salesperson is saying, I got to have X, you're saying, okay, well, that's fine, but that means you're not going to get Y. And then they're like, oh, well, I need Y. Yeah. So, but helping them recognize that there's just not an infinite set of time and resources to go build everything that they want.
Yeah.
That it's a very strategic process that product management has to go through to come up with the roadmap. And I think when they understand that process, then they have a little more respect for our roles as well.
Yeah.
Right. Rather than we're not just feature monkeys, just, building constantly. Right. So.
Nice. Yeah. Kirsten, is that similar with your experience? I mean, with having, bringing the effort involved to the discussion?
Yeah, 100%. I think what's important to keep in mind here is I really don't want the product leader their primary role to be managing product requests from various parts of the organization. I would rather that they are leading a cross-functional team that understands the strategic vision and direction and why, and everybody's being accountable and responsible for their piece of it, and they're bringing those requests forward in a holistic fashion that's calibrated against that bigger strategy picture. Because at the end of the day, right, and let's iterate together that way. At the end of the day, we're gonna succeed or fail together, right? It's not like sales gets to win and the company loses, or customer support gets to win and the company loses. We win or we fail together. Right. And so what we have to do is we have to have everybody bring a certain level of maturity to the conversation to say, we understand the big picture of where we're heading and the direction we're heading. And so while I'm going to make these requests, I also understand and have a healthy regard that everybody else has these requests. And so let's put a construct in place where a product leader can facilitate that dialogue. And then we all walk out of the room feeling good about those trade-off decisions that were made. I don't want them to ever feel like they have to, I love the term feature monkey. I don't want them to have to feel that way.
Right. That's great.
I'm sure that's offensive somehow to like the monkeys in the jungle. So I apologize up front.
Hey, I think I'm the one who said that. So yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of,
so we'll blame Cheryl. I'm comfortable with blaming you.
I was going to say, speaking of sensitivity, we've got soft skills, right? So how does soft skills play into managing conversations and expectations? Kirsten, do you want to start off with that one?
I do. I love this question because I think they're so incredibly important. I think probably one of my biggest lessons learned just in my career was my first 5 years of my career I spent working for Fujitsu, which is a Japanese company.
Mhm.
And one of the number one skills I learned as a byproduct of that is culturally, the Japanese are very focused on saving face. So if we have a situation where we've got to come up with an outcome that not everybody's idea is going to be put forward, et cetera, how do we have that conversation in a way that we extend a win-win to everybody in the room, even if somebody's idea doesn't end up being the one that gets put forward, even if we don't agree with it, we have a way to acknowledge and empathize where that's coming from. And I think it's really, really important. As somebody who's done a lot of business internationally, I can tell you, Americans have a tendency to have a mentality of you win or you lose. And other countries don't have that same mentality. They have this mentality of we have these things we're looking at. How do we create a construct where people feel like they were heard? They understand the nuances behind the decision making, and then we move forward from there. And I think if you can take those cultural experiences outside of maybe what your predisposition is, this is something I personally had to learn just because of where I happened to grow up, right? You end up with a far better construct if people really understand the reason these decisions were made. People will extend you all of the time, energy, and understanding in the world if they understand the context behind it. In order to do that, you have to have great soft skills. You have to be able to be empathetic. You have to be able to be a good listener. You have to be able to effectively acknowledge somebody's idea in a way that you extend to them a sensation that they aren't walking away as a quote unquote loser because their idea didn't go forward, by being able to articulate to them, I completely understand where you're coming from. I understand why that has merit. However, in this bigger context, I think we better head in direction A versus direction B. Does everybody see and understand why that is? And that's a very, very different conversation, and we're not going to do that because it's a bad idea.
Right.
And so I think it's really critical to make sure that you're constantly bringing people together, because again, we're going to win or lose together. And so we have to have a very collaborative, interactive environment. But by the same token, we also have to be prepared to make the final decision, and hopefully everybody understands why that is. And so I think soft skills are just as important as general business acumen is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Yara, how about you on this front? So soft skills, how does this play into your ability to manage without authority?
I think I would call the soft skill maybe curiosity, but manifest as asking more questions. And specifically, I think something that's effective, like when you're dealing with people, you're going to have a small sample size, like product, as our ability to generate data gets larger and larger, we kind of lean towards, what is like this large data pool or sample size say, but we don't always have that when we're having one-on-one conversations. So when I am trying to kind of, make a decision or collect data about something, or maybe, validate an idea that is being proposed, I'll try to ask kind of templated questions as well. So, ask the same questions, to a bunch of people, ultimately, because I think, something that was mentioned earlier, I think Cheryl mentioned this, opinions don't matter. And so that data has to come from somewhere, and that can be qualitative data. So I guess kind of, balancing what we have quantitatively with the qualitative data, but finding a way to do that in scalably.
Very nice. Very nice. Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add a couple different things, make it a point to actually spend time with the folks that you are working with. And, by factor of you being in this product role, you have a role to influence, right? So what I mean by that is, try to find one-on-one time where you're getting out of the office, you're grabbing coffee, grabbing lunch, but getting to know people on a personal level. You don't have to be best friends with everybody that you're working with. But what I found is that the more kind of vulnerable to them that you can make yourself, the more that you're showing, hey, look, I'm a real person, you're a real person. We're all obviously like in this for the same purpose, to help the company do this. But it puts people a little bit more on your side. And then, when you are having the actual, conversations about feature requests or ideas. I think that kind of stuff matters. I mean, I think allowing the people you're working with to see firsthand also that you really care for your customers. You kind of lead by example in that way. So I think all the other things that have been said, like it's right on, but don't forget that, stepping out of the office and getting to know the people that you're working with and letting them see that, you're a real person too. I think that can actually help, when you're at that point, when you're at the point in time where, maybe you're having a debate with somebody or, again, these folks don't have to be your best friend, but at least, I guess it costs you nothing to be friendly and to be approachable. And for those, I just think when those people are, when you're doing that, those folks will kind of be on your side in certain ways.
In times of the difficult discussions and difficult decisions, you've built, a level of personal connection and respect with them to help support you during those difficult conversations, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's great. And Cheryl, how about you? The soft skills, related to your role.
Yeah, so I think I've mentioned the word empathy a few times already.
Yeah.
And so, for me, this is really one of the key things that great product managers have is empathy for their customers, and customers are stakeholders as well as, the people who buy and use your product. And the other, soft skill, and I think Mike touched upon this already, is it's all about constantly building relationships. I think a lot of product management organizations get stuck in the tactical whirlwind of the day, which is fire drills, escalations, engineering's got a question, design has a question, and it just becomes this cycle. And we had a saying at Marketo, which was nihilo, nothing ever happens in the office. And let's not take the office too literally here, but you got to get out and build relationships with people across the company and with your customers. And, that is almost as important. Product management to me is an art and a science, and that's where this sort of comes all together.
Yeah.
You can learn how to write requirements and user stories and all that good stuff, but these softer skills are, I think, what actually makes a product manager stand out as an amazing product person versus just a good product person.
Yeah, that's great. I love that you each called out very distinct different things around soft skills. We talked about cultural implications, your ability to be curious and have empathy and to build personal connections. I think it's a great takeaway, I think, for the group here is just, building these soft skills. I think you guys gave great categories of areas that people can think through. The last question before we move to questions from the attendees, it's related to managing expectations, and I think we've spoke about this in different questions here already, but specifically, what are some of the artifacts or tools or information or empirical data that you use to help manage expectations across different stakeholders? So Mike, do you want to start us off on that one?
Sure. And I'll just name a couple here to kind of keep things simple. I mean, but some of my favorites, it's literally having the roadmap be visible to everybody. Ideal, and I understand, some organizations might be so massive where, maybe this presents challenges or isn't possible, but if it is possible, I would make that roadmap available to absolutely everybody at pretty much, on demand, whenever they'd want it. So I think it's important for everybody in the company, whether you're on the sales team, whether you're in customer success, engineering, user experience, to know like these are the things that are important to us. These are the things that we're building. And, we're not just approaching product, just flying by the seat of our pants here. We had a corporate strategy, and then this is the roadmap that leads us to stemming from a product strategy. And just having that visible, I mean, at least people know where the organization is going. Another thing that I like to do, and again, it's sort of, I suppose, depends on the size of the organization, but whenever I'm meeting with customers, and I encourage this from other members of the product team too, I love taking notes, right? But I make those notes available to everybody, who wants access to them too. So it might not be everybody in the company, but certainly it's folks on the product team. And by that, I mean engineering, design. When we're out there meeting with customers, I don't think that information needs to just certainly it shouldn't stay in my head, but it also shouldn't stay in my notebook or on my computer. It should be shared. And so those are just a couple of things that come to mind for me, that when I think about things that I like, actual like tangible things that I've shared with the team where I've seen that it's helped, those two in particular come to mind.
Very nice. And Cheryl, how about you? So managing expectations, I mean, what is some of the information that you're pulling from, or the tools that you use to help do that?
Yeah, so earlier on, I think I answered a question about, data being a really important tool to help manage stakeholders and requests and all that good stuff. And so using products like Aptrinsic that'll actually allow you to track how your customers use your product. I mean, as a product person, like that is like the holy grail. We need to know, what are people doing? Did I build something that actually created any value for my customer? And then that actually allows us to then take that data and use it to defend decisions. Again, opinions are opinions, but data for us became very defensible. And if we can say that we need to spend time working in this particular area of a product because we're not seeing the right amount of traction, or, hey, it happens. We missed the mark. We got a requirement wrong, or we didn't truly understand the problem that the customers were facing, and we need to go back in, or we just need to take it to the next level, right? We built something amazing and they want more. But all of that usage data really helps us see something that you can't see any other way. You may have anecdotal information by talking to a customer, but when you can actually see what they're doing, that makes a huge difference.
Awesome. That's great. Sierra, how about you on this one? So what are some artifacts and tools that you've used successfully to help manage these expectations?
Yeah, so Mike mentioned having that roadmap available to everyone, and I think the key thing here is having it in the same place and having a universal language for how you talk about kind of your priorities over time. And one of the things that we do is kind of, and I think is a generally used framework is what we're doing in this period of time is a hard commit, what we're doing the next period of time is a soft commit, and kind of under consideration after that, and setting those expectations for what's actually going to ship or not. But the honest truth is, like, most people, no matter how much you promote your roadmap or you say, find this document here, and you keep it in the same place, people still forget where it is. They're still going to come ask you questions. And really, one thing that I would recommend to like all product people is you don't have to be the source of information for everything, right? Like, you don't have to remember every piece of data and everything that's exactly on your roadmap. And I try to just kind of pick and choose what are the key things that might come up at any time that I need to know for anyone in the company. So it's, what are our, maybe top 5 stack ranked initiatives we're working on? Yeah, your roadmap might have 20 things on it. But what are just the things that at any time we've agreed on, we know that are, these things are going to be important. The second thing would be, what are our top couple of KPIs that we're tracking towards? And then the third would be and what is the kind of framework we've agreed on for prioritizing things? And I think adding, and another kind of side note that I'll add based on the data conversation is, if there are, if there's a question that continues to come up, and there is a piece of data or two that maybe isn't available to everyone, or that they may not know, just kind of having that handy. But I would say in this case, probably less is more. And, it is good to have a source of truth that everybody is, aligning around,
Right.
Not necessarily depending on people to actually go to that. So everybody needs to be repeating, kind of the same message within the organization.
That's great. So Kirsten, we'll close this question up with you. I mean, I know Pragmatic Marketing, they have, a brilliant framework around different artifacts to use. I mean, the question for you specifically is, are there different forums that you find the need for different artifacts or different tools to use, perhaps by the size of your company or the size of the forum that you're presenting in? Maybe you call out some of the things that you've used in different scenarios, and kind of what works and what doesn't.
So there's a gazillion tools out there, right? There's a gazillion artifacts out there. But I think the most important thing to keep in mind is those are a byproduct of what you're trying to do. Yeah. They're not the solution to the problem. They're something that helps facilitate your ability to drive the solution. And so the way that I think about it is this. I love to create cross-functional participation and cross-functional representation, because if I may, Sierra, I'm going to add an item 4 to your list. And my item 4 is that I want not only me to be the one who's producing tools and artifacts to help manage expectations across stakeholders, but I want every cross-functional part of the organization to be part of that dialogue as well. And so at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're trying to get from point A to point B as an organization, right? And whatever that point A to point B is, we're trying to grow market share. We're trying to penetrate a new market segment. We're trying to increase our share of wallet within our existing customer base. And our roadmap should be the way that we express that point A to point B. But then what I want to do is I want to ask every functional area of the business, we know we will be successful when? And what are they going to produce and report to share with the team as a proof point that we're all moving in the right direction and aligned? And so not only do I want to use those key tools and artifacts that everybody's mentioned and all the other ones you can find, right? You can get RACI matrices and you can get, you know, your release plans, et cetera. But what I really want to do is I want to boil it up and I want to say, all right, the roadmap is how we're articulating that vision and that strategic direction. And when I look cross-functionally, I want every single person to be able to report back to the team, we know we will have been successful when. What are our KPIs? What are our dashboards? What are our proof points together as a team? And so that's something that I really like to have is that dashboard or that KPI across functional groups as well.
Yeah, that's great. Dashboard, KPIs, information, bringing people together. I mean, you guys hit on a lot of fantastic strategies to help product teams be more effective. I think this has been amazing. I wish you guys had this conversation with me when I began my career. It would have saved me a lot of heartache, I think. So let's move over to kind of the last portion here. We'd love to get questions from the attendees here. You know, Mike, Ciara, Kirsten, Cheryl, they all promised me they wouldn't bite if you asked some tough questions. So just as a reminder, please use...
Oh, we can't bite? Come on.
Yeah, not hard is what, you know. So, so just as a reminder, so if you do have a question, feel free to post it out on Twitter using the hashtag #ProductExperience, or feel free to use the chat box that's open. There's a little question box within the webinar solution here. So one of the questions that came in, let me see here. So do you have any advice for people to build their network inside and outside a firm when starting in a new company? So I don't know, if, Mike, do you want to start off with that one?
Sure. I mean, when you are starting off, that is obviously you're going through so many different things, so many different feelings that could feel overwhelming. I like taking it sort of, you know, one meeting at a time. And whenever I meet with somebody new, I also ask them, hey, you know, when you started out, who do you wish you met up with in the beginning that you didn't, you know? And you might find, hey, somebody from the UX team is saying, you know what? I wish I just asked the chief marketing officer for coffee, you know? And to me, it sort of gives you an idea of, just lets you make good on that, right? Like you now have the benefit of taking initiative in doing that. What I found is, you know, those first couple weeks, it's sort of like being a student in college, right? When you're a student in college, you have permission to email anybody and ask for advice. You have permission to, you know, call up a customer and, you know, if you have some sort of product idea and say, hey, I'm a student, we're doing research, you know, would you do this? But, you know, when you're new in an organization, I feel like most of the time you have permission to reach out to pretty much anybody within the organization and get to know them a little bit. That's been my experience. So I would say, you know, ask those questions you're meeting with folks and, you know, plan the next coffee meeting that you have then. I think it can be easy. It's just you have to push yourself to do it. And maybe that's the hardest part.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would add to that one maybe tactic for, you know, kind of, yeah, I think people are, you know, generally willing to have those meetings within a company and, you know, maybe having a question like in the communication that you send to them, you know, one specific question that I want to talk to you about. And, you know, I think people generally want to share their expertise. And then something that, you know, if you are at a company that is, you know, like pre-IPO and kind of still works with venture capital firms, I've found those connections to be, you know, really, really strong as well in kind of, you know, reaching out because they're building their own networks as well. And so that's where I've met kind of the most, the strongest product networks. And then, you know, those people kind of leave those companies and go on to other networks. And so that's worked really well for me for product.
So one thing just to add too, for those who are product leaders on the call, one of the things we did at Marketo that was really successful was we put together a list of people to know for them. Because, you come to a big company and, maybe 500, we were about 1,000 people at the time. And it can be pretty intimidating, especially if you've got a more junior level product manager coming in and you're telling them, go meet with the head of support, right? They're like, oh, wait. And a little bit of a tidbit on, and I think Ciara just mentioned this, what to ask them. And, we always like to have people get the perspective on what do you think makes somebody successful at the company? And it'd be interesting the kind of answers they would get depending on the perspective, whether they were in success or sales or marketing or engineering, and what was the answer to that particular question. But providing them with some guidance and some path that they could go and follow. And then it was also a way that we could help to make sure that they were actually coming up to speed and doing the things that we were asking them to do as well.
That's great. Kirsten, any comments on that one?
Yeah, I think, one of the great things about the internet is the ability to find specialty groups. There is a specialty group for everything. Clubs, meetups, industry trade associations. And so what I would say is think about where your customers, whether where your constituencies, where your peers commune, and go there. Join an industry trade group. Who's the industry trade group in your field? If you are trying to learn how to do your job, look at an event like Product Collective that is a veritable ocean of product leaders trying to be better at their job. So that would be a great resource to tap into. If you're in, healthcare, what are the key industry trade groups? Where do they go? How, locally, are there meetup groups by industry? So there are so many resources available if you would just get online and tap into it and proactively seek out where you can tap into these resources. What I love about what Mike just said is we like to say that it's not complex, but it's hard. And I think very often the hardest part is just actually showing up to an event by yourself and, putting yourself out there. But if you do that, you'll glean great rewards.
Excellent. So we have another question here that came in earlier in the webinar. So we may have addressed it, but I'll just call out quickly. So the question is, how do you get individuals to take action when they don't report to you? And there's an example here around, a specific need that the product team had around a beta feature, and operations needed to take some action. And only until the CDO got involved did they get in line, or at least not get in line. That's a terrible way of phrasing it, but did they get on board with supporting what was happening with the launch? I mean, is there anything maybe that we haven't touched on yet that you can think of?
Can I jump in here?
Yes, please.
Yeah, this is Kirsten. So I think you got to trot out those mad soft skills. I think the soft skills that we talked about before, me personally, if I have an individual that just doesn't seem to want to get on board, the question I always want to know is, why is that? Because what I never ever want to do is overlook an opportunity to get a real holy grail piece of data for why we shouldn't be doing something that I am perceiving as resistance. There may be something to it. And so if I have an individual that I can't seem to get on board, I will literally just go sit down in their office, or I'll ask them out for a cup of coffee, and I'll just ask them, it doesn't seem to me like you are on board with this. And you are a knowledgeable professional, you are an expert in your field and industry, so I want to understand why that is, because I don't want to overlook a key piece of data or information, since I can't know everything, that you could offer to me that might help move us forward together more effectively. But I can't know that unless you help me understand where that resistance is coming from. I never want to have to be in a situation where I have to go to the CEO to be a tiebreaker. I'd rather be able to sit down and come together for the good of what we're trying to do for our customers. And I never want to overlook the opportunity that source of resistance might be a really great nugget of information that prevents us from doing something we shouldn't be doing in the first place.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, we call out, be direct, go straight to the source and talk to them. I think that's great advice. So I have, let's see, we're a little over time, so thank you everyone for sticking with us. I have one more question here. The question is related to, do product leaders, are you feeling more and more pressure today to make product adoption and usage part of your KPIs? I guess I'll just throw the question out there.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
So this was a huge issue for us, sort of in the latter part of my career at Marketo, where product usage became such an important factor in understanding the customer journey and how a customer was adopting our product and how we could potentially cross-sell and upsell new products and services to those particular customers. And I think that companies, as they grow, whether they're an early stage startup or a later stage company like Marketo, where what becomes important shifts, right? In the early days, it was all about just innovation and closing deals, but now it's much easier to keep a customer than to get a new one. And so you've got a rich set of customers. Why not try to continuously ensure that they're gaining value from your product, because the competitors are out there and they're willing to take them from you, as well as the opportunity to provide them with new products and services. And it all goes back to understanding how your customers use your products, the kind of data that you can gather about that usage, and then being able to communicate to them in a highly personalized way. And when you really understand who they are, then you can do that.
Fantastic. So Ciara, Mike, any other contributions on that one?
I think just to kind of add to that, one thing that we know is, we can actually tie product adoption to, retention and renewals at this point. After once a company reaches the point where, they're in the phase where they have more to retain than sell, that becomes absolutely critical. And in all the enterprise companies I've worked at, admins do look at usage dashboards when they're going to renew. And so this is not just, this is not like a kind of end user versus admin thing. This is all related to, kind of the bottom line as well.
Excellent. So with the time, I know we're a little bit over, I'd like to thank, everyone who's attended. I think the questions have been phenomenal. I'd love to thank our speakers here, Cheryl, Mike, Ciara, Kirsten, wealth of information. Thank you all so much for sharing. I would like to leave our attendees with a couple of additional assets. So if you go to apptrinsic.com, we've authored a book called Mastering Product Adoption. It talks about a lot of the subjects that are pertinent to being a successful product leader today. And for those who aren't yet aware, Pragmatic Marketing, if you go to their resources page, again, a wealth of information for you. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for participating in every which way. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Travis and Apptrinsic, for having us today.
You bet.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye, everybody.